Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. Learning to meet directly, to come face to face with our own shortcomings, whether real or perceived, is a threatening experience for most men. To be perceived as weak or incompetent is just about every man's worst fear. Most of us carry around specific and well-practiced self-judgments that steal from our joy and aliveness, and that must be hidden at all costs from public view. But what happens when life throws us a curveball and forces us to truly meet the man, his choices, his behaviors, his limitations that we've become? My next guest is here because he's had a few of those curveballs come his way, and he's taken them on, allowing them to develop a new sense of self to share with the world. Pellegrino Riccardi is an author, speaker, conference moderator, trainer, and cross-cultural communication specialist. On a personal level, he identifies as a father, as a hunter, and as a provider. And in his new book, Drowning Quietly, Memoir of a Man's Shortcomings, Pellegrino lays open for the world to see his own shortcomings and how they changed him as a man. His hope is to model for all of us the power of bringing our shadows out of the light for review, and hopes to inspire other men to redefine outdated models of masculinity and reshape how children see their fathers. So let's hear more about this man's journey and what he's learned from doing the hard work of redefining self through the lens of his shortcomings. Welcome to the New Masculine, Pellegrino.
Hi, wow, what a wonderful introduction that was.
Oh, it's one of my favorite things to do is to write something out about
I can tell. I can really tell. That was lovely. That was so, it wasn't just lovely, it was really insightful. You've obviously read the book as well.
I may have read it.
Wow, that was so nice. Yeah, I'm sort of sitting here. You probably saw me nodding my head as you were reading that, going, wow, this is really cool.
Thank you for that. Me. Yeah, this is all about me. Wonderful.
Yeah, I loved it.
Well, it's so nice to have you on the program, and I'm really interested to know if there's anything else I didn't share in that intro about you that's like sort of context for the listeners to know before we jump into the meat of this.
No, but you pretty much got it all there, especially the father hunter provider, which you know, when you asked me to pick three, I just went gut feeling. I didn't think too much, just knee jerk. What am I? Three things of the long list of identifiers you sent me. And I kind of surprised myself. I was so honest with myself. You know, I do see myself as a hunter, provider, and father. Those are the three things. And I think that was where I was coming from when I wrote the book, actually, initially. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. I think those three kind of explain a lot of my shortcomings and a lot of my strengths as well.
I think I remember in our very first conversation that you and I had, you said how similar those three identities were also to your father. Why did these stand out to you, and why is it so sort of like, why are you so aware of how similar that is to the way your father might identify?
Well, first of all, my father had a better excuse, if I could use that word. I'm making the inverted comma sign in the air quotes. He had a better excuse to be a provider and a hunter because he was an immigrant. You know, he left southern Italy and moved to the UK in the 1960s looking for work. And it wasn't a career move. It was a hunger move. I call it a hunger move. I mean, they were hungry. They had nothing, don't they? He had to move. So he was literally hunting for food and for work and providing for his family. He really had no choice about that. And of course, biologically, he was our father. What surprised me is that I ended up being very much like that too. I guess because I learned those behaviors from him, right? And I learned to admire those behaviors while I was growing up as a child. And again, I write about that quite a bit in my book. He hated his job. He hated his work. He hated English people, actually. He didn't really like them. Sorry.
Interesting choice to move to the UK.
Dad, if you're listening, sorry, the secret's out. No, what I mean, he hung out with his fellow Italian immigrants. It's not unusual to seek the people you most identify with. And he hung out with his Italian friends, often from the same villages, that they'd moved from in the south of Italy. So the faces I saw in the UK, I just saw that when I went on holidays to Italy with them, I just saw the same faces. They just had better suntans because they'd been in Italy for a month, right? So yeah, I kind of learned those things from him and admired him because it was a sacrifice for him. It really was. I think it really was. And for my mother too, not just my father, but my mother too, who also moved from the south of Italy. It was a big sacrifice what they did.
Yeah, so tell me what it was like being raised by the man that your father was, that was an immigrant. How did those sort of experiences shape you being his son?
Well, the good parts of it was that he taught me really important values like hard work, perseverance, self-sacrifice in the positive sense. I'll come to the negative sense in a minute. And being loyal to others and just providing for them and making sure that you can provide the best world possible for them. I learned those values from him and my mother as well. But the not so good side of that was that I also learned to keep anger inside me because he had a lot of anger and frustration as well. He was never treated seriously because he had poor language skills. People treated him basically as a bit of an idiot. And, he had very low paid manual labor, just about managed to pay the rent, buy a house, buy a car, and take us on a holiday to the old village back home once every other year. And he had this frustration, this anger, this resentment that just built inside him. And I also, unfortunately, learned that, I mean, you can't call that a quality really, but that's definitely inside me as well. This kind of anger and resentment and always working hard for others and perhaps not doing enough for yourself. So it had both sides really growing up with him.
I wonder if that's a pretty common experience for the children of immigrant parents, no matter where you live and where you immigrate from. I think there can be some easy transitions from like English to English speaking countries, or there can be some cultures that are a little bit more of an easy transition, but then there are other ones that are a bit more jarring, especially if there's a language barrier and especially if the skill level at which you are engaging in the workforce puts you at a lower sort of class level than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having said that, I also learned from his mistakes because he didn't try too hard to integrate and assimilate, right? He was rejected a few times because of his language skills, and then he just hung out with Italian friends. So when I moved to Norway, where I live now, I learned to speak Norwegian very quickly because I had witnessed firsthand how bad it can be when you don't master the local language skills. And that's even though Norwegians speak really good English as well, right? Scandinavians speak great English. But I was determined to learn Norwegian, and I did that, and that opened a lot of doors for me. And this whole idea that he resented English people, I've made an effort to get to know Norwegians and learn their traditions and learn their culture and really get in there and be part of society. So, I learned from his mistakes as well. I definitely have, as an immigrant myself.
Yeah, so let's dive in a little bit more about what you're talking about around the pieces around learning to sort of push your anger down, or the amount of anger that might be present for him. What have you been learning about anger? What did you learn from him about it? And then also, what are you learning as you've sort of continued to develop as a person?
Well, what I learned from my father was that anger was the go-to emotion.
Yeah.
It was the most legitimate and validated emotion that a man could have. He wasn't the only immigrant who was angry. Like you said, there were lots of them around. I think he was the most angry of them all. But I learned from him that was the number one. Whenever you wanted to communicate anything, you just showed anger, and people seemed to validate it. Unfortunately, he had a level of anger which was also really frightening as well. But maybe subconsciously, I learned that anger could also dominate people and provide you with a sort of false sense of control of your environment, right? If I can't integrate, if I can't assimilate, if people won't take me seriously, then at least I'll, scare the living daylights out of them and pretend I have some kind of control over my environment. And that ended up being a really toxic emotion at home. He was constantly angry, and his anger was really scary. And thinking back now, I think it was his last. It was like his Alamo of emotions, wasn't it? I can't express any emotions. Nobody takes me seriously, but goddamn, I'm going to really show my anger, and that's going to make people take me seriously. And I only saw this when I grew up and became a man myself and looked back and tried to understand where my own anger was coming from. It was okay to be angry, basically, all the time.
And so what did you do how did you start to manifest your anger? How did you express it or not express it, considering what you had watched and observed from him?
Well, vocally, obviously, physically, breaking things, punching things. I don't think it's unusual. I lost my mother when I was a teenager, so and there was no therapy for us and no counselling, and so I would go around vandalizing things and breaking things. And when you're in the moment, you don't understand what you're doing. Now I can see that I was just expressing grief and sorrow and anger. Okay, it was part of it, but there was no language for expressing emotions. That's what I really sort of, looking back at how I was raised by my father. We never developed the proper language and emotional language to express complex emotions. And now I think that isn't that difficult, really. And with my own children today, I know as a father today, I put that as one of my identifiers. I constantly try to get them to express their emotions. Tell me what you're feeling. Try. Is it this? Is it that? You're kind of an emotional coach to them, so that they can build a language. Without expressing emotions, especially hurtful ones, we often do turn to anger, don't we? And you can explain a lot of the horrible things going on the planet right now. You dig down, you don't have to dig very deep before you get to some point of anger, some kind of pain, right? And anger is expressing that pain. And I really feel that if we could deal with this emotional blockage, it sounds cliche, but we really would make the world a better place.
I think it's so true what you're talking about. I think so many men are going to resonate with that concept of that we don't have a language set. We don't have the ability to talk about our emotional landscape or to talk about what's going on for us. Most of us are actually raised and socialized to lean away from lean away from our feelings, to not even reflect on them because they are a sign of weakness or they're feminizing us. They make us, don't be a sissy, don't be a girl about our feelings. Right. And so I love what you're talking about what you've integrated as an adult father now, which is that you see it as your role to be an emotional coach for your children, to help them develop language sets around that, because that's what was missing for most of us, is that we weren't encouraged to reflect on, weren't encouraged to parse out, what am I really feeling, to even get into any level of nuance and complexity with it. It was just anger.
Or how about this one? I think a lot of men turn away from difficult emotions because there's a kind of a paradox there. If I lean into them, I feel incompetent and out of my depth. Therefore, I'm not as good as I thought I was. Therefore, I'll turn away from them because that's easier. It's lazy and easy, but it maintains this kind of false facade of manhood around us, right? I think that's got a lot to do with it as well.
It's like a snake eating its own tail. It keeps reinforcing this sort of man box that we find ourselves in. And I think it's really challenging to go and look at those challenging emotions, because we as men often really like to look at things in a problem and a solution kind of situation. And yet sometimes, like something like grief, there is no solution to grief. With losing your mother, you don't solve that grief. You feel it. And so when there's no solution to there's a solution-based approach to looking at our emotions, what's the incentive to do it? Because then it just feels crappy.
Right. That's a really good point, actually. There is no solution. You just have to be in it and go with it. And maybe one day it will kind of get less. Mm-hmm. But you can't run away from it, that's for sure, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I think a lot of men try.
Yeah, in various ways, right? There are lots of ways to run away. You don't have to just smash things or get angry. You can turn to all kinds of modern day, distractions to get away from the essence of the problem. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. That's also a really good point there.
Yeah, we have learned to find ways to work around our emotional landscapes, to navigate them in ways that we don't actually have to deal with them, to just move around them, rather than, as you were saying, get into that like core pain or that core wound that's in there that the anger is just a symptom of. It's just the sort of reactive way of protecting that part of ourselves that's hurt or afraid or doesn't know what to do in the world.
Right. And the other thing that I've also, and this took years to kind of process, is that when you actually do that, you go into the emotions and try to deal with them and try to talk about them. That's probably the toughest thing you'll ever have to do. That's where you really show you're a man, to use that expression, right? But by leaning in and going into that dark hole, it's a scary place. You'll feel really vulnerable and incompetent to begin with. and it's like, that's the only place to go. And that's the real manly thing to do. I keep using this word manly, of course. I can't find a better word right now. But you know what I'm saying? It's sort of, that's the real difficult. That's the real feat. Not to run away, not to distract, but to go in.
Yeah, it takes a ton of bravery and courage, and we often associate those things with manliness. And so I get why you're using that language of it's the manly thing to do. It takes a lot of bravery and courage to go into that dark hole and to feel incompetent at being able to express yourself and to fumble your way through it and to be clumsy with it. What was your journey of learning that skill set for yourself? How did you learn it? Did you have mentors, teachers, therapists that were teaching you that? Did you do it alone? Like, what was your pathway?
I kind of did it alone. I have a very good friend in the UK who is a therapist, so he led me down certain avenues without actually giving me therapy, because that's unethical. But, you can't. He pointed me in a few directions, and I started doing a lot of self-reading, self-awareness. But basically, what really set me off was I could see it wasn't working for me. Say what you like about Dr. Phil, but Dr. Phil says some really cool things like, how's that working out for you? I love that phrase, So how's that working out
It's a great phrase.
It's a great phrase, right? And if you'd have asked me that phrase like 15 years ago, so how's that working out for you? The answer is not well at all. I just kind of realized it wasn't working. How did I know that? Fewer friends, distance in relationships, being told by a very honest, frank wife that, listen, you got to do something about this, because did you realize that when you did that, listen, I was talking to our son today and he's really scared of you. He's terrified of you. I think that was another one. Really? Because that's not obvious. That's not my intention. Absolutely not, right? It wasn't my father's intention either to terrify us. That was not his intention. So slowly but surely, this awareness thing wasn't working. I was distancing myself from people. People weren't really, making the effort to sort of reach out to me. I thought, I can't do this. I've got to do something about it. And then, of course, the big one that really made me want to take a really good look at myself was what happened by a swimming pool in Italy, when my young daughter was just 3 years old. When I did the unimaginable, some would argue the unforgivable, of leaving my 3-year-old daughter unattended by a swimming pool. I mean, my sister and her husband were also by the pool. It was one of those classic, I thought you were looking after her. No, I thought you were. I thought, everybody thought, but nobody was actually doing it. And ultimately, it was my responsibility because I'm a father. And I walked away and went to the kitchen to help my wife cook. And I sort of talk about putting a mirror up to yourself. What kind of a man, and it wasn't what kind of a person, what kind of a man was the word I kept using to myself, walks away from a swimming pool with an unattended 3-year-old. And that's really what started this big journey, which ended up being a book about trying to understand why I did that, who I was, where did it come from, etc. It literally started as a page of A4 where I wanted to just write it down to try and understand it myself. And it just turned into about 280 pages of the same theme, going through, trying to really get who I was. And the way I decided to do it was to look at myself through the eyes of women. So I tried to see myself through the eyes of my mother, my wife, and my 2 daughters, one of them especially. And it was quite a journey, actually. But I think the result at the end was certainly, absolutely, I really got to know who I was. And the common theme that kept coming up was all the times am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, please do.
All the times I'd fucked up. Big time. And whether that was actually something I did or something I thought. So we couldn't have that word on the front cover of the book, so we used shortcomings instead. And if I had my way, it would be called something else. Yeah. So they taught me out of that. You can't have that word on the front cover of a book, really. No.
Well, it's a really, I found that to be such a striking part of the book is you didn't ease the reader in, myself as the reader, into your shortcomings as a man. You just kind of laid it out there from the beginning, the biggest confrontational story of your life and experience of your life right up there out front. And I think that's such a powerful way to bring the reader in, is to not sugarcoat it, to not get the reader to like you before you even share what your own experience was and your own criticism of self was. It's just to lay it out there right up front and then allow the story to unfold as it goes. But I just found that to be such a powerful way to invite the reader in.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you recognized that and talked about that with the publisher a lot. And the reason I ended up staying with that is because that's also the theme of the book, is that if you're gonna do this, guys, men, it's got to be unapologetic. It's got to be straight in. You can't, don't waste time. Don't fool yourself. Just see it and say it as it is. And I wanted the book to start like that. Mm-hmm. No, like you say, no sort of soft, straight in with what set the whole thing off. And I have, readers will read the first chapter and they've sent me messages, friends and family, and just, WTF is in the text message. I can't believe I've started. What happened to Once Upon a Time? And no, it's straight in. And that's how it was the actual day. It was really, really, it shook me to the core. It shook a lot of people to the core. And I wanted the book to shake people to the core, because I'm kind of saying to men, shake yourself to the core, cut all the bullshit and the crap and get on with it. Get on with dealing with your emotions and do it now.
Such a male way to go about it. I think we don't like to do things gently.
Yeah, right. It's so aggressive, and I recognize those ironies as well, and that's one of the things we talked about with the. But one thing I was really adamant with the publishers: this has to be unapologetic. Kept using that word, unapologetic. No filters. Unapologetic. The other thing I said, I'm not a victim. I don't want this to be a sob story. This isn't an Instagram post. This isn't a Facebook post. I'm not looking for people to like me. Obviously, I don't want them all to hate me either, but do you know what I mean? I'm not looking for sympathy. I want this to be real, authentic, unapologetic. Lay it out there. This is what I think and do. And I'm pretty sure there are lots of men out there who feel the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there's a reality to the fact that most of us don't learn unless it gets really hard, until we're shook to the core, until it's there. There's a part of me that in my own like professional journey and my own self journey also that's trying to like learn how to grow and learn from softness and from ease and from just like letting things get a little off centered and bringing them back rather than needing to go all the way out there. But I think that's the reality that most of us learn from being shook to our cores.
Well, even if you look at society as a whole, we've developed and changed, and when we've been shaken to the core, right? The recent one is the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It shook us all to the core, and yet looking back, the more people I speak to about the pandemic, more people say, it wasn't such a bad thing actually.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, it was bad when it kicked off, and all the deaths and the sickness and horrible, but looking back on the whole thing, we kind of needed that. Yeah, we needed that. Sometimes you just need to be shaken to the core.
Uh-huh. Yeah, sometimes the warning lights are not enough. It needs to actually turn into the crash.
Just stop. Yeah.
As we keep finding with like climate crisis and political unrest everywhere and racial injustice, like the warning lights are not enough often. It needs to get to an escalated crash that wakes us up from things.
Exactly.
Something that you said that I really want to underline and highlight that I think I want to encourage more men to do is to see themselves through the eyes of the women in their lives. I think that's such a powerful way that you started to approach this and started to approach your storytelling from the book is that you brought in the women in your life as a mirror so that you could see from their perspective. Why was that such an important aspect for you to do in your own self-work?
Well, it was both a structural thing. I mean, once you start writing, you realize you've got far too much to say, and it would be a 1,000-page book, and nobody's going to publish or buy that. I need some kind of structure and focus. How can I, thematically, as a writer, how do I focus it? And I stumbled across this quote, which I put at the beginning of the book. I'll just read it out here. And it said, the quote is from a book called The Women by Claire Booth Luce. And the quotation is simply, "A man has only one escape from his old self, and that is to see a different self in the mirror of some woman's eyes." I just love that quote, yeah? And especially the last bit, in the mirror of some woman's eyes. Right. Who are the most important women in my life? That's obviously my mother, my wife, my daughters. There you go. There's, there are 4 acts just there. So that's it, basically. And as I started writing, of course, I realized that I was, this could also almost be therapy in itself, isn't it? You're taking this kind of third perspective and describing yourself through the eyes of others. I found that to be a really useful tool, actually, and a really useful vehicle. Having written that, after writing the book, I think that would be a really good tool in everyday life. Just ask women around you, what do you see when you see me? Or men, for that matter. It doesn't matter. Just get someone who's really close to you to describe to you what they see unapologetically with no kickback, just honest feedback. That's a good start, I think.
It's a big deal to be able to do that without any kickback.
Big deal, right? I have a wife she's Norwegian, and Norwegians are quite well known for being quite brutally honest. There's something about Scandinavian communication style. They're really selective with their words. They don't use too many words, but when they use them, they really count. So it's boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh is usually my answer. Really? Really? Yeah. Okay. There's that kind of pause while you digest. But that's a great way to communicate, right?
Well, when you were talking about your wife coming to you and sharing that your son was sort of afraid of you, and you had that that whole that's so opposite of the intention you were trying to bring to it or that you thought was happening. Yeah. It's actually such a crucial thing that I've been really reflecting on in the work that I do with men is to really get us clear on reflecting on the gap that happens between our intention and our impact. That we might come into something with really good intentions, but the impact that we're having on others is something completely maybe unintended. And to really look at, like, if my intention and my impact are misaligned, that Dr. Phil quote that you brought up, like, how's it working out for you? How's that how's it getting you to where you want to go? Or how is it building the relationships you want to? Or how is that not? And so I think that's such an important element that you're talking about. And I think this element of being able to look at yourself through the eyes of the women in your life is such a powerful way to approach that, because women are socialized in very different ways than we as men are socialized. And they have some of the skill sets that I think are really important for us as men to develop. Like emotional literacy, like care of others, like awareness of the well-being of those around us, or the pain of those around us.
Also, they have much less, society requires them much less to be aggressive. If I can put it that way. That's not part of their arsenal of communication. So, I guess I'm generalizing a bit here, but, this is kind of softer approach in the way they can be honest, but not as aggressive when they communicate, right? And I find that really appealing as well. I love that, because as soon as we meet aggression, we react with aggression, right? That's also human nature. So to be met with this softer communicative approach is really appealing to me. Plus, for me at least, I want to be liked by the women in my life. I mean, I say that too. I'm really, I want to be liked. I want to be admired by my wife, by my daughters. I look again back to the kid that was raised in the UK by my mother and my father. There was so much fear there. They regret it now. I mean, my father's an old, soft man now, but, I tell him these things. He's sort of, oh, God, I didn't really mean that, and it wasn't my intention. I was shit scared of him. And I don't want my kids to be shit scared of me from a purely emotional point of view, but also because it shuts down all communication, doesn't it? How can you communicate honestly when you're afraid? So that was so important to realize that, and it's something I've really worked on for many years. And I haven't reached I'm not there yet. I'm not over the line yet. I still have really crap days when I'm just not very good. Where I just become my father again, and I'm sort of angry, but I catch myself much more. Or my kids say to me, listen, you're being really angry again. Okay, sorry. It's as if you lose yourself, right? And to have those people around you who feel safe enough to say that to you is so cool. I think that's so good that they can say that.
Well, that's such an important thing that you're talking about is that so much of, like in your case, you had a father with a lot of anger and you lived in fear of him. That's imprinted in your nervous system. That's not just a conscious thing. That's something that is in the fabric of who you've become in the world and something you've lived with in your nervous system. And so it is easy for those things to get activated and for those things to take over when we're not really staying conscious and we're not paying attention because they're ingrained in our nervous system. They're not just a cognitive process anymore.
It is, like you say, well, that's a great point to make. It's like being a Pavlovian dog, isn't it? You can't control yourself. It just triggers that reaction in your nervous system. Yeah.
And so I do think the work for us as men is to get out ahead of our activation, or to notice when we're getting activated into those places, and to sit back away from that, to learn new strategies, to get feedback from those around us so that we can actually stay conscious, stay awake, stay in charge, rather than letting our activation take over and wreak havoc in our relationships and actually cause negative impacts that we weren't intending.
And, I'm sure not the first and last to refer to it. And, I know that this podcast will be coming out a while after it's actually recorded, but, the slap won't be forgotten for a few years, right? I'm pretty sure that's exactly what happened to Will Smith. It was a trigger of his nervous system. I'm sure he wasn't very conscious of what he did until the evening when he calmed down a bit and just thought, what the hell have I done? That's such an important point you make, and again, writing the book was an excellent tool for distancing myself from myself so I could see myself, right? I could see myself doing these things. I was able to write the story honestly without changing anything. I wasn't there to persuade people I was a good guy. I was just telling the story. Yeah? And the more I told the story, the more I was able to accept my failures, shortcomings, flaws, whatever you want to call them. They're part of me. That's okay. But now I know how to catch them. I know how to recognize them. I know how to catch them. I know how to learn. And hopefully, the best part of it all, if I can see my kids in 20 years' time and see that they're not repeating my patterns, then I've reached the end of the rainbow, right? Then I've done my job, kind of thing.
Sounds like you've chosen to be the pivot point in your sort of family generational stuff. That you've chosen to yeah, and so then those who you pivot, and then those beyond you get to benefit from that situation, from doing that healing.
I'd love. Yeah, that'd be good on my tombstone. Here lies a pivot. A little smiley face.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that would please my British sarcastic, ironic humour sensibilities. Here lies a pivot.
Oh, that's so good. Well, I'm still continually fascinated by a man who chooses to write a book about himself, but through the lens and the eyes of the women in his life. And so you talked about your mother, your wife, and your daughters as key women in your life that you're looking at yourself through. What are maybe some of the key things you learned from seeing yourself through your mother's eyes or through your wife's eyes or through your daughter's eyes that are worth highlighting here?
Yeah, well, the main one with my mother was that, first of all, my mother was not this, she was definitely not this kind of soft Italian, doting, submissive mother. She was hard as well, yeah? She came from a hard life. When you come from a hard life, you're going to be hard as well. So, I write about this. She was very sort of submissive to my father in public, but in the house, she could give as good as she got. She was really hard. But one thing she always said in the many lovely conversations I had with her before she sort of left us way too early was that she said, life is beautiful even when it's ugly. You need both parts. If you think you're going to have a life of roses, you're sorely mistaken. And I hope you don't have a life of roses because that's not a life. You need both. Life is beautiful even when it's ugly. And in my talks often I talk about Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. And I say, forget that, guys. I've got a much better one. Life is like an espresso coffee. Because in southern Italy, when you drink your espresso coffee, you drink the bitterness of the coffee with something sweet. You always something sweet. A biscotto, cake, sugar, sweetener. You have both. Symbolizes life. It's the bitter and the sweet. Or as my mother would say, the sugar and the shit. You have to have a both in life. And that's still with me today, actually. Every time we go through crap, I think this is just part of the deal, It makes us more resilient. It forces us to learn about ourselves. And I think carrying that forward, with my wife later on, me and my wife went through some real struggles together, namely IVF, trying to get kids I just thought you got kids, and that didn't happen with us. It was a much, much more painful process, the whole IVF process. And that's when I also found that many, many people go through the same process. But, I learned through my wife, she's the ultimate stoic. I've read a lot of stuff about stoicism. They should have a picture of my wife on the cover of all those books. She's brilliant. Yeah? She's the ultimate stoic. I had a bit of man flu a few days back. Oh God, you'd think I was dying, She's the opposite. She's the ultimate stoic. And I think that through her eyes, I've learned the calmness of stoicism. It doesn't mean you deny the pain you're going through, but you accept it more. And, she was amazing through that whole IVF process where, to be honest, the man does nothing really. We just provide the seed. The woman goes through a lot of shit in that process. So I learned stoicism and calm acceptance through her. And then through my daughters, really, what I learned through them is that, you know, how can I put this? We as parents, we're huge in our children's eyes. We're huge, physically and emotionally. That we don't need to be angry. We don't need to shout. We definitely don't need to hit, right? And, you know, I had a very physical upbringing. You don't need all that. We're huge in their eyes. And I've understood how huge we are and how influential we are by looking in the eyes of my kids. You know, my friend back in the UK said to me once, something I'll never forget. He said, you know, as long as your kids are never in any doubt that you love them, you can almost get away with anything, but they need to know 100% that you love them unconditionally. I'll never forget that. Doesn't mean it doesn't excuse anything, the wrongs you do, but it's kind of, as long as they know without a doubt that you're not manipulating them, using them, you only love them, then you've done it. You've done it. And I look in my kids' eyes every day. I honestly do. Every day I look at their eyes to see if they still love me. And even when they hate me, when they think, my teenage daughter now, even when she hates her father, thinks her father, oh, you're such an idiot. I look in her eyes and she smiles. Mm-hmm. That's enough. You still love me. That's enough. You can hate me, but I know you still love me. I love that. So those are the three perspectives I've learned.
I appreciate you sharing those. Those are really powerful to hear. There's the one that I am sort of trying to puzzle my way into in my own mind. I think this is the sort of maybe a part of a cultural difference in masculinity or in our ways of showing up. This thing of learning from your wife, stoicism, the acceptance of pain. Stoicism is often a part of, in the United States, it's often a very big portion of the way that we demonstrate our manliness, that we become, we be very stoic, but in a way that's disconnected, in a way that's flat, that's vacant in some way, that we're not moved by anything. And I would imagine growing up with like Italian parents and like there's a lot more expressivity cross-culturally in certain masculine cultures. Ours is actually quite vacant, our version of stoicism. But I love this sort of redefinition that you learned from your wife around stoicism, that is not avoiding the pain or the discomfort. It's actually an acceptance of, it's taking it on and being with it from a calm place.
Yeah, she doesn't deny it for a second. There's no pretense. There's none. My father, the classic macho, patriarch Italian male, just pretended that nothing ever hurt and nothing. He was in full control all the time, and you know, I can do this. And no. She accepts it. She never denies it, but she does it calmly and stoically. There's a difference. She's totally connected with it.
I appreciate you sharing that, because it actually gives me pause to reflect on, because I've been sort of looking at this stoicism as something that we need to kind of let go of as men. And yet I think there is a divine side of it that you're talking about, that it allows me to see another more nuanced, rich application of it and in its divine form.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying, earlier on, that you go into it rather than run away from it. You see a lot of toxic masculinity, or this kind of macho-ness, is running away from the essence, actually. You're not being tough at all. You're running away from it. When you're angry, you deflect. When you lash out, you don't let people in. You're just using all these kind of strategies to actually avoid the essence of the problem. You've got to go into the middle, into the essence. You've got to go into the dark. Those vulnerabilities I know you have, but you don't know how to talk about. You've got to talk about them. Again, to use a masculine phrase, but you really want to show me you've got balls, do that. Go on, do it. I'll hold your hand if you want, but we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And I find even today, I try with even here in Norway, when I try and have deep conversations, they don't have to be deep, just talk about emotions. You see the deflection strategies people use to not go there. Joking, laughing, changing subjects, swearing, oh, I just got to go and get a drink. It's amazing. They're afraid to go there. Plus, they don't have the emotional language to talk about it when they get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know from reading the book that one of your sort of core wounds that you were having to navigate, and you sort of alluded to it just a bit ago, was your IVF journey, the infertility journey. I've had one other guest on the podcast that's really talked about the emasculating or the challenge that it brought to his masculinity to be navigating infertility. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey and your story of like, how did that experience or those experiences impact you as a man?
Yeah. Well, if there's one thing we were put on this earth to do, this is my head speaking, this is my internal dialogue. If there's one thing I was put on this earth to do, it is to procreate. And that is the most natural thing in the world, and everybody can do it. Oh no, not in this case. And, I'll never forget the first times I went to the clinics to provide, well, first to get the tests. Yeah. Places that are full of other men who are obviously there for the same reason, who don't look at each other. There's no eye contact. There's no dialogue. It's literally like a mausoleum. It's like a morgue, yeah? And I never forget going off to my little room to provide my sample, shuffling along in my little slippers and it's like, it's walk of shame. It's dark, silent. And it was the first time in my life I really felt as if I didn't work properly. I mean, I felt like a machine and I'm not working properly. There's a part missing. Can't I just order a spare part on the internet and make it work? And then you find out through the infertility treatment, the IVF, that they can't actually fix the problem. It's called assisted pregnancy, right? They can only assist you. And they keep telling you that we can make the conditions as good as possible, but in the end, nature decides. So not only are you not working and there's a part missing, but you're at the mercy of nature. And if ever you want to feel completely helpless, that's the place where you're going to feel it. At the same time, once again, it forced me to face my emotional darkness. And of course, when it finally worked, it really helped me appreciate life, what life really was. That it's not something you take for granted. But absolutely, I mean, it was until we actually got pregnant, I felt as if I just wasn't, the darkest moments, I felt as if I shouldn't really be here, to be quite honest. What's the point of me being here?
Wow.
Nature would have got rid of me by now. Because I'm not here for, I can't even provide the one thing. Sometimes on a good day, I would joke about it and say, women can do everything nowadays, and so it should be. But there's one thing they can't do yet, and that's provide sperm for an egg. We still have a monopoly on that. And I'm thinking, God, I don't even have that anymore. I don't even have that. I've got nothing to offer this planet. That it got that bad, actually, really. Even though it sounds insane to say it now. I was really, and again, I talk about this, and I do it in a really unapologetic way. Not for readers to feel sorry for me again, that's not where I am, but for them to understand that it's okay to talk about these things, that it takes courage to talk about these things, that you're not alone if you talk about these things, you're not on your own. I was astounded. I don't know what the figures are in the States, but in Norway, 1 in 7 couples go through some form of IVF treatment. 1 in 7. 12%, isn't it? Something. That's a huge number. So I think in the book I quote, on a world scale, that's 45 million people. That's 60 million people, I think. That's the population of Nigeria. There are loads of people going through the same problems. You're not alone. And I think that's an important thing to say as well. People often say to me, why should I be vulnerable? What's the payoff? I'll just come across as weak. And I say, no. First of all, you won't come across as weak. But what you'll probably find is you're not alone. There are other people out there waiting for someone to make the first move. So when you make the first move, people usually respond fairly positively.
I think that's even more true with men than with women. Is like, because every time I've done men's workshops that are really about helping men sort of do their own self work and open up and develop some emotional literacy, and every man is just waiting for the first man to cry, and then once that man cries, everybody else starts to cry. And I think even in this journey you're talking about, there are a lot more spaces where women can talk and process about their IVF journeys. There's more permission given to, and it's still even something that's often hidden away and that most people don't know about it and don't know about all of the like hormonal things that go on as women are going through IVF treatments and the havoc that wreaks on their bodies. And, but there's a little bit more consciousness on the impact that journey has on women. And I think what I'm starting to hear is this pattern that there is this emotional impact. There is this weighty impact on the worth of a man who's going through a journey like that, especially if you, through the IVF and fertility stuff, you find out that your parts are the parts that are not working, that what your part of the equation is what's not happening.
Yeah, which is what we found out, actually. I mean, the low motility figures, and it kept leaning more and more towards me, because that's the other process of IVF is it's a process of elimination. You eliminate all the things that aren't working, and that just added to the emasculation. It just felt like, God, I can't even do this. Can't even do this. I can't grow a beard, and I can't inseminate, which I can't actually. I can't grow a beard. I'm sitting there admiring a little goatee going on there, and I've tried growing beard, and it just can't grow a beard, so it's like double whammy.
Oh, this is just my first attempt at something, because I can't quite do the full beard either.
Looks good.
Yeah. Well, there's this thing that you're talking about. I mean, I think it's important to sort of recognize how far that escalated for you to like, why am I even here? Nature would have dealt with me long ago. Yeah. That's a pretty intense existential type crisis that you reached at this point. And I think that there's such a powerful thing you said around being at the mercy of nature. There's almost this part of me that thinks that more men need to come into contact with being at the mercy of nature, because it breaks apart our sense of control and dominance over the world when the pandemic, as you were talking about earlier, gave us one opportunity to do that. Like every bit of control we thought about our productivity and our way of being in the world got shifted because nature went, nope. Natural crisis can do that. It's actually something I've really learned in the work that I do with horses is like, I'll put a halter on a horse and it's 1,000 pounds of an animal. If that horse, I think I have control while we're walking together. If it chooses to run, I am not going to be able to manage that. Right. And so when you have to confront that lack of control and things that are bigger than you and the sort of being at the mercy of, that can be a really powerful doorway into the darkness, the fear, all the things that you've been trying to avoid, but then also some freedom on the other side once you've been able to move through some of that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, it goes back to what my mother said about life being beautiful, even when it's ugly. The ugly parts are the bits you would love to control, but you can't control. And that was one thing, part of my Southern Italian upbringing, which was quite healthy. There's much more openness and acceptance around death, for example. So I still go back to the village in the south of Italy every year. And they still, when somebody dies, they still put the person in state in the room, in the bedroom at home. You go and visit and kiss the corpse on the forehead, and it's just much more open. Death is much more part of life. And it helps us accept things, doesn't it? And yeah, you're right. We do live in a world where we believe we can control everything, and it's just bullshit. You can't. And one of the things you can't control are your human aspects, your flaws, your shortcomings, whatever you want to call them. They're all part of you. They're not good, they're not bad, they're just part of you. And you need to talk about all parts, because otherwise, what happens with us men, and this is the whole title of the book, The Drowning Quietly, it's not just the opening scene by the swimming pool. I believe that so many men out there drown quietly in their own emotions. They just kind of suffocate in them. They're unable to get them out. Or they feel they can't because they'll be seen as weak or incompetent or not in control. And people do drown quietly, they don't drown like in Hollywood films, screaming and flailing. They go down quietly, and so do men. And suicide rates are highest in men. And of those who do attempt suicide, men are most successful because they use mostly violent forms to do it. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to stop drowning quietly. And I want men to read this. I want women to read the book as well and give it to their men. And, it's time to come to the surface again and learn this language of emotions. And I highly recommend that people write their own little book. You don't have to publish it either. Just write, sit down, talk about these things. Because if you don't, you're going to end up at the bottom of the pool and running out of breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you are correct that we are seeing the sort of ramifications of all of how often men are out there drowning quietly. Is this like there's huge incidents of male depression and mental health conditions. The suicide rate is intense, and and then you also look at some of the men that are drowning quietly, and then they choose to not drown quietly. And we're looking at sort of like gun violence in the United States is a huge thing right now. And so it's not always, it's like many men are drowning quietly for a long time, and then an outburst happens. They choose to use anger on themselves by committing suicide, or they choose to use anger on the systems that they perceive as disenfranchising them. And so I think we really do have to look at that. And what a powerful invitation for all of us to kind of sit down and write about our own shortcomings, to really look at those pieces, not as a place of self-flagellation to hate ourselves even more, but as a place to see ourselves.
To see ourselves and to share with others as well. Because the thing about people is that when you ask them for help, they're usually only too willing to help, aren't they? They want to help, but they're not mind readers, are they? They don't know. Just like, and they're not bodyguards. They're not lifeguards either. Lifeguards are trained to see the signs of drowning, and they're really difficult to see because it happens so quietly. They say you can only tell in the eyes, can't you? The eyes say everything. But there's no sound. Unfortunately, we're not lifeguards of emotions. That you've got to tell people, you've got to voice your feelings, or at least say that you need some help or you want to share. And what I also encourage people to do is, if somebody does approach you, especially a man, and wants to share with you, please make sure you welcome that man with open arms. I'm here for you. Again, the tendency in us, in humans, is often to shy away from uncomfortable emotions and feelings. Again, this is more sort of the message we see in the world is that life has to be so bloody perfect, and look at my Instagram account and look how amazing my life is. Rubbish. Life is beautiful even when it's ugly. You've got to show the ugly parts as well. And that's what I wanted to do with the book. Not to self-flagellate, just like you said. It's not to do it. Share. Get people talking. Use it as a platform. And I know that that's something I tell men all the time. I do a lot of work in business, here in public speaking. I speak to a lot of top executives. And they'll say things like, nobody ever asks how we are. We always have to ask how other people are. We're the leaders, right? We're the leadership. We always have to motivate others, but nobody asks how I am. I think that's a really sad, lonely place to be, isn't it? So I just say, well, you got to tell him.
I think there's you're pointing to another element that needs redefined, is like, what does leadership mean? And what do men in leadership roles mean? How do they show up with people? Is it their job to really just always be the motivator and to always just be the one asking the question? In my sense of leadership, that's not how I like to lead anymore. No. It's not sustainable for me in that way.
No, and if nothing else, it should be a role model. And role models are role models. They teach us the behaviors that we should be adopting, right? So show me that behavior. Not all the time. I don't want you always drowning, for goodness sake, but when it happens, show me how to do that. Model that behavior. It sounds so obvious, and yet so few people do it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think in many ways that we're shamed out of doing it, and we are seen as incompetent or weak because we show those things rather than actually being celebrated and been given praised for doing so or rewarded for doing so. We're actually seen as weak and incompetent. And so why would I do that, especially as a leader? I run like leadership team development, nonprofit team leadership development, and I watch all the time how the leaders in that organization don't want to go through that. They want their staff to go through that, but they don't want at the top level staff to go through that because they don't want to be vulnerable in front of the people in front of them.
It's
and I
crazy.
get that. It's not psychologically safe in many organizations to do so. And so we have to sort of figure out how do we infuse more psychological safety for the whole human to show up, not just this one little fragment of someone.
Right, exactly. And that to me just seems crazy. And I guess my organization is my little family here, and my kids are reading the book, and they are seeing a new side of their father. And so far, so good, actually. They like it.
They're in the process of reading it now?
My daughter was at the book launch. I said to my daughter at the book launch, and my daughter said to me afterwards, God, I've never really, it's so nice to see you emotional and vulnerable. And it was really nice, Papa. And I really like that. And wow, cool. Excellent. So, yeah, I mean, that was another part of the old book writing, is just so they have an account of who their father was and, all the ugly bits as well. So
I love that little bit of a rites of passage that is pretty normal for all of us. We all sort of have to grow up and have that moment where we see that our parents are flawed and are human and are limited in so many ways, and that they're not the sort of idealistic version we had in our minds. Most of that times that comes through like challenging or painful experiences, but what a lovely introduction into that rite of passage for her, that she just gets to see your full humanity in this without it being in crisis or without it being a really hurtful experience. She just goes, it's nice to see this.
Yeah, right. And also because I guess also her generation, they do have a lot more emotional intelligence within the school system as well. They are learning a lot more about that, and stuff that we never had. And yeah, it's also good. They also see my patterns in their grandfather, so my father. They can see the similarities, but they also see not just the distinctions, but the journey I've made.
The pivot.
I think that's really cool. The pivot, right? They say things like, we can see where you come from, but you're not like your father. You're much, and they do use words like better. You're much better at, and you don't get as, and I love that. Yeah. Then I've done something.
I love that you're taking in their feedback in that way, that there is space in your relationship with your children for them to offer feedback on the challenging stuff and on the positive stuff. That it's the lines of communication move both ways. It's not just you telling them who they need to be in the world.
Yeah, which doesn't exclude horrible fights and quarrels and shouting matches. And here we have all that stuff as well. I don't think we walk around in this kind of world of harmony. There's lots of that, but that's part of the honesty as well, right? I'm having a shit day today, and you're going to know about it. All right, okay. What's going on here? In my family, you're allowed the whole spectrum. We're really good at that. The whole spectrum. Go for it.
And I want that for all of us as men, that it's not about learning these skills and sort of developing in the new masculine or learning to be more emotionally literate and talk about your shortcomings. It's not, the expectation isn't perfection or that you live as this thing that you can't ever be a human. You can't ever fail. You can't ever fall down and get yourself back up. We all do that. I myself as a coach, sometimes as a life coach, I can feel like I have to live in this sort of like perfect life to be a representative of something. And yet it's a human life. That would just be a fragmenting myself into a role and not letting myself have a humanity attached to it.
Yeah, right. And often they say, what's the new masculine today? Well, the new masculine doesn't exclude the old either, right?
Right.
It's everything. It's a lot of the old and a lot of the new. It's not like the old masculine is all bad. There's lots of great parts there as well. It's not one or the other. It's the whole range. It's the whole spectrum. I think that, in my opinion, the modern masculine, or in my case, since I am a heterosexual white male, I have a certain definition of my man picture. Yeah? But it is a lot of the old strength and providing and a sense of safety and security. I think that's good. It's good. But I combine that with the ability to show the vulnerabilities, and I can ask for help, and I can ask for advice, and tell me what you think. I'm not afraid of that either. I'm not afraid to be hurt. I'm not afraid to be criticized, even though I can feel it inside me. It makes me feel, I still want you to give it to me. You know, I'm not afraid of that. I think that's what the new masculinity is. It's someone who's fearless, including fearless to weakness or perceived weakness or fallibilities. That's what it is, I think.
Sounds like you're saying that it's more of an additive process than a subtractive process. It's not about just rejecting the old. It's actually an additive process, and it can feel like there's parts of challenge and struggle to make our way through, but it actually gives you access to more rather than less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You put it much better than I did. Good coaching. Like a great coach.
Oh, well, thank you. So I'm really curious to know what maybe the biggest lesson you had from writing this book. Like, what's your biggest takeaway from writing this book and sharing it with the world, at least at this phase?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to steal or borrow from another great life emotional, intelligent person. That's Brene Brown, who said that shame feeds on secrecy. Shame feeds on secrecy. Shame is a killer. It will make you sick mentally and physically if you carry it around for too long. So don't keep it secret. Get it out there. Don't tell the whole world straight away. Perhaps start with your inner circle. But share those secrets you have. Share those things that make you feel shameful, weak, inadequate, whatever word you want to use. Talk about it. Talk about it. Write it down. Share it with somebody. And it really does work, actually. Some of the things I talk about in the book are kind of, really? Yep, really. Did you really do that? Yep. Did you really think that? Yep, I really thought that. But you can feel the shame dissipating. It doesn't disappear entirely, but it dissipates. It dilutes. It loses its grip. It doesn't dominate your life. It's not as dark anymore. And it really worked for me. Again, you don't have to write a book. Just share it with people. I think that's my main message. And I believe the more people do that, the more, just to stick to the title of the book, the more people will come to the surface again and breathe. They'll come up and they'll breathe air. They may go down again and then they'll come up again. They keep coming up for air. That's what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that the book, Drowning Quietly, Memoirs of a Man's Shortcoming, is a roadmap for the way that you did it. It gives us a journey. It gives other men permission to do the same work of reflecting on their shortcomings and helping themselves evolve as men. And it gives women who are reading the book, or people that don't identify on the gender binary, it gives people the ability to see some of what a man might be going through, the pressure that a man puts on himself, the well-rehearsed self-flagellations and self-criticisms that we carry around with ourselves, that we are doing everything in our possibility to avoid and to not show to the world. And so it gives insight into how to navigate these things as a man is stepping further through his shortcomings and trying to evolve as a person. So I appreciate you giving men more permission to do that by starting with you, by modeling it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I mean, and that's basically why I did this. There was a long process. I shared or at least the first few chapters with lots of people. And I had two questions for them. Is this any good, the writing? Obvious question. And do you think people would benefit from this? And the answers kept coming back. Yes, go for it. You've got to do this. You've got to write this. From professional, not just friends and family who are going to tell you what you want to hear, but from people I respected who aren't afraid to tell me the truth. Get this out there, share it. This is going to be great. This is exactly what we need. So yeah, if I'm that man in the room who makes the first move and makes everyone else cry, then so be it. That's great. Fantastic.
Well, thank you for being brave enough to be that kind of man. That's the kind of manliness that I want to see in the world. That's the bravery, the courage to step forward and be the first to do that, to be on the early edge of something, which gives other people permission to do that themselves. So thank you for putting that out there and allowing your vulnerability to be seen by all of us. If people wanted to find the book or wanted to find out more about the work you're doing in the world, how might they do so?
Well, they can get the book on Amazon, which is the paperback version. If they really, really want an exclusive version, they can get a hardback directly from me. And they do that by writing an email to one of the simplest emails in the world, which is pellegrino@pellegrino.no, no being Norway. Also, they can find me on LinkedIn. You know, my work is within business as a keynote speaker. So there aren't that many Pellegrino Riccardis in Norway. I think I'm the only one in Norway, but they can find me on LinkedIn, or I do a little bit of Instagram as well. They can follow me as a speaker on the road on Instagram, Pellegrino_Riccardi. The thing about having a name like Pellegrino Riccardi is that there aren't that many in the world, so I'm not that difficult to find.
Not that hard to
just
find.
Ignore all the images of the sparkling water. I've got nothing to do with that. I'm everything else. I'm Pellegrino the human.
And your website is?
Pellegrino-Riccardi.com.
Okay, I'll make sure that those are also linked in the show notes so that people can easily access them. I'm so grateful that you joined me, Pellegrino. This has really been wonderful to connect with you, to hear about a man who's willing to kind of just move into his shortcomings and use those as a doorway to more freedom rather than to getting locked and drowning further quietly away. So thank you so much for sharing yourself with the audience and for giving permission to other men in the new masculine to do the same.
Well, and thanks for having me on. This has been really, really fun, actually. And I hope it's really useful to lots of people. Thank you so much. Yeah?
I have no doubt it will be. If people want to get in connection with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can find me on Instagram at Travers03. It's where a lot of the ongoing conversations of the new masculine are going on after our episodes. Or if you want to become a contributor and want to support the mission of the new masculine, you can go to patreon.com/the new masculine. That's patreon.com/the new masculine.